Well, if you talk to the average American, they usually say that crime is pretty bad in their city. Yet, media reports, some of them say that crime is actually going down. Now, a former Justice Department official specializing in research and statistics says you shouldn't buy the data that the media is putting out. He says crime indeed is going up. Here to join me is John Lott himself. John, thank you for joining. You are president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You served as a senior advisor for research and statistics in the Office of Justice Programs and the Office of Legal Policy at the Justice Department. You have an op-ed out in the Wall Street Journal entitled "The Media Say Crime is Going Down. Don't Believe It." And why shouldn't we believe it?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. Look, there are two different measures that we have of crime, and either the media doesn't understand the difference between them, or who knows. But the one that everybody uses is the FBI Uniform Crime Reports. Those deal with crimes reported to police. But we've known for a long time that most crimes aren't reported to police, and since 2020, there's this other measure that we have, this National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys about 240,000 people each year to try to get a handle on total crime, not just those that are reported to police. That measure and the reported crimes measure have been going in opposite directions, which is something we've never seen before. I'll give you an example. You look at the crime from 2021 to 2022, while you had the FBI reported crime data falling by 2%, the National Crime Victimization data showed an unbelievable 42% increase in violent crime occurring at that time. And so what's the reason for the difference? I think there's several, but one major reason, and something that we've known for a long time, is that when arrest rates fall, when people don't believe that law enforcement is going to be able to go and do anything to catch and punish criminals, they just don't report crime as frequently as they had before. And we've seen law enforcement collapse in an unbelievable way in the last few years in this country. I'll give you a simple example. You look at arrests in large cities over 1 million in population for violent crime. In the 5 years from 2015 to 2019, 44% of reported violent crimes result in arrest. By 2022, it had fallen to 20%, going from 44% of reported violent crimes being arrested to 20% of reported crimes being arrested. I've never seen data like even remotely similar to that beforehand. And of course, just because somebody's arrested doesn't mean that they're charged or that they're prosecuted or convicted. So just to put it in maybe a little bit different perspective, if you take those numbers and look at arrests as a percentage of all crime, reported and non-reported, only about 8% of violent crimes result in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes result in arrest. So when you consider the fact that a lot of those don't even get charged, being a criminal in large cities is not a very risky profession for them.
Wow. I know when I was working for Fox in the pandemic, memo did go out in our newsroom that stolen vehicles with fake license plates were now a crime that police were not pursuing. They just were not going to even look for that because they just didn't have the resources in their department to be going after all crimes. So that's definitely something that has happened in the past few years. And perhaps some of that's associated with the defund the police movement. But in Minneapolis, for instance, where defund the police kind of originated, they reported in the past year, Star Tribune reported that the city added an immense larger amount of funding to the police department. After defunding, basically, they refunded. So could reductions in crime or reports in some statistics saying crime's going down, could that be associated with refunding some of the police departments?
Well, even the police departments, one is just because they're refunding doesn't mean that they're back to the levels that they were at beforehand. In the police departments that I've looked at, often they're not. But beyond that, they've had huge retirements. You know, whether it's New York City or other places, Los Angeles or Chicago, they've had huge numbers of police that have retired. Often the ones with the most experience, that have the most knowledge in terms of solving crime. Those people are hard to replace. You hire a new police officer, it may take 3 to 5 years basically before they get to be a very productive member of the police department that's there. And so, you know, even if they start to hire people, and what police departments around the country have found is that even with the funding, they're finding it very difficult to go and hire new police officers. You know, they're having to tremendously lower their standards. A number of police departments are hiring people with extensive criminal records in order to try to fill their positions in the police departments. But you know, it's not just policing that's we've had the trouble with, though that's surely a major issue. You've also had issues with like district attorneys across the country who are refusing to go and prosecute violent criminals or property crimes. And so what's happened in that case is that a lot of the police officers who are still there figure, what's the point of arresting people? If I go and arrest somebody and they're immediate released, I mean, we've all seen the pictures of police officers being attacked in New York City. And within hours, you know, 4 of the 5 people who had done the attack were released. And you see that across the country. And so police often think, you know, what's the point? I've constantly come across stories where homeless people or others attack people, that they just get arrested, they get put back out on the street, they attack more people, they get arrested, they put back on the street. And the police at some point just, you know, if somebody comes up and they say, I just got attacked, they think, you know, what's the point of going and arresting them another time? And then on top of all that, you have witnesses who figure whether they should come forward or not, because they say, look, if I come forward and I agree to testify and the guy never gets charged, all I've done is anger somebody. And, you know, there's a good chance. I mean, when you look at these numbers, 8% of total violent crime in these large cities results in an arrest. You know, there's a good chance that even if you try to report somebody, it's not going to, you know, all you do is get yourself in trouble. And so you have reluctant witnesses that also make it difficult to go and prosecute these people. And all that feeds back to the earlier stages in this. So we face a real problem here. As I say, if I go and I tell you that 1% of property crimes in these large cities results in arrest, 1%, you know, I mean, everybody should engage in crime. You know, I mean, I hate to say something like that, but it's just, it's turned into a very riskless occupation for people.
Right. So here's your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. The media say crime's going down. Don't believe it. Now, in that article, you write that in 2022, 31% of the police departments nationwide, including the big ones like Los Angeles and New York, didn't report crime data to the FBI. And that is why media is now able to report crimes going down, because a third of these departments just didn't hand the data off to the FBI, where the media is used to getting accurate crime statistics. Now, why would police departments stop reporting their crime to the FBI?
I mean, there was a dramatic change in 2021 and 2022 and 2023 for police departments reporting this data. And it's because in 2021, the Department of Justice changed its reporting requirements. They went to what they call a NIBUS system, which requires more data. The thing is, these cities have the data. I mean, you can go to their websites and you can get all the detailed data from there. But for political reasons or whatever, they've just decided not to go and report that data to the FBI. The FBI, it's not like this data isn't included. But what they do is the FBI estimates, kind of like with the census numbers, where they go and estimate what the population is. And I would argue there appears to be real problems with how they're estimating what these crime numbers are. And then on top of that, the sentence after that in the piece that you're reading from, I also note that there are cities, our police departments that have reported crime data to the FBI. And the strange thing is that the FBI numbers that they record for those cities are systematically less than what those police departments told the FBI their crime numbers were for murder and other types of crimes. I've tried reaching out to try to find out why there's this systematic discrepancy. It's not something that I've ever seen happen before. But in the last couple of years, there seems to be this gap where, Baltimore will tell the FBI they have so many murders, and the FBI numbers show, 20 fewer murders than Baltimore told them. Nashville, other cities have seen similar types of experience. So there are basically three reasons why I think there are real issues with the FBI reported crime data that's there. And, I wish the media would kind of understand some of the weaknesses there, because they keep on saying that people don't, are mistaken to think that crime's increasing, and they just want to keep reporting that it's falling.
I wanted to ask you about the crimes against basically officer-involved crimes, excessive use of force by officers, because the media narrative for the past decade has been that there's an escalation of officers going after people of color, especially Black people. And you've been in this research and statistics for the Department of Justice, so perhaps you can lay out whether police do go after people of color at a disproportionate rate to white people. Because I'm curious about this, because I was a crime reporter for 9 years out in the streets, and I would be on the scene of officers who committed violence against a white person, and it would never make national news. If it was a Black person, it did.
Yeah. So I've done research on police shootings, for example, and what you find is that when a white officer shoots a Black person, both the race of the officer and the race of the person who shot are included in the news stories. When a white officer shoots a white suspect, only the race of the officer is included. When a Black officer shoots a Black suspect, only the race of the suspect that's shot is included there. And if you have a Black officer shoot a white suspect, the race of neither the officer nor the suspect is included in the stories. And so, I can't blame a lot of people who are, in these demonstrations and riots, whatever, who think that there's a real problem, because the cases they hear are where white officers are shooting Black suspects. And I assume when they hear a Black suspect is shot, but not mentioning the race of the officer, they just kind of assume and fill in that they think it's a white officer doing the shooting in that case. What I've found in my own research is that Black officers are actually shooting Black suspects at a slightly, though not statistically significant, higher rate than white officers shoot Black suspects. And, that's after accounting for whether the suspect was armed or not, whether they were involved in the commission of a crime at the time that the event occurred, and other factors there. So it doesn't seem like the race of the officer or the race of the suspect is really the key issue that's going on there. Virtually always the suspects who are shot, whether they're any race, are armed when they're shot. It's and they're virtually always committing a crime. So you have armed suspects who are committing a crime, and the question is, what do you expect officers to do in those types of situations? I'm
Okay.
not going to go and say that they're not occasions when you see a bad person do something, a bad officer. Yeah, there are those cases for sure, but they're very rare. And when you look at the average numbers that are there, it seems like these guys have good reasons for why they shot the suspect.
Wow. Just to tie up our discussion of your op-ed, what do you think would motivate the FBI to omit some of the data?
Well, I have to tell you, I could give you war stories for a long time about working in the Department of Justice, but the FBI data people are. I worked in the federal government in the 1980s. I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and if you would go and tell somebody that there was an error in their data, they would fix it. The FBI people are, I don't know, ideologues or whatever you want to call them. They have a mission there. So there were multiple projects that I was working on when I was at the Department of Justice that dealt with the FBI data. And when I would go and point out that they were missing things or that things were wrong, twice I had people say to me, "Well, I'm a Democrat," as if somehow that's an answer to the question. Either the data is right or wrong. I don't really care what your political views are on this stuff. And what am I supposed to say? I'm a Republican, and that's how we go and argue whether the data should be included or not or fixed in there. But I give you one story if you have like 3 or 4 minutes about a war story as an example
Sure.
of the types of problems that are there. When I agreed to go to the Department of Justice, one of the reasons I agreed to go is I wanted to get data on errors in the NICS background check system. This is the background check system that's used for gun purchases. People who deal with this know that, we'll hear that there are 4 million dangerous prohibited people who have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. That's simply false. What people should say is that there have been 4 million initial denials, and something over 99% of those are mistakes. They're false positives. It's one thing to go and stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing simply to stop somebody because they have a roughly phonetically similar name and similar birthday to, let's say, a felon. And the thing is, the errors overwhelmingly go against Black and Hispanic males. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other Blacks. 34% of Black men in the United States are felons. 18% of Hispanic males are felons. 6% of white males are felons, and 3% of Asian males are felons. So, is it surprising then that given you have this large group of people that may have similar names, that you're going to have relatively high error rates among Blacks and Hispanic males?
But hold on, white people. What about all the Johns and Steves and as well as Asians? They all have similar names in their racial group.
They do, but you only have 3% of Asian males are felons. So the likelihood that you're going to run up against somebody, all these groups, Hispanics have similar names too, so it's the question is, it's a function of two things. It's a function of people having similar names and similar birthdays, and at the same time having a large pool or a large percentage of that group who can be, should be prevented from being able to go and buy a gun, right? And so I want to just get the data on the error rates in the NICS background check system by race and sex, okay? And so that's one of the reasons why I agreed to take the job at the Department of Justice. And so when I went there, I talked to the Bureau of Justice Statistics people, and they were interested in it. So they reached out to the FBI, and they asked the FBI for the data, and the FBI said, no, we're not interested in looking at this. And the Bureau of Justice people said, well, it's not your decision whether to look at this. It's your job to collect the data, and it's our job at the Bureau of Justice Statistics to go and analyze the questions that we want to go and analyze, and we want you to go and give us this data. And the FBI came back and said, no, we're not going to give it to you. We can't think of any reason why anybody would want to break down this data by race and sex. And my response was, you guys break down everything by race and sex. What's the big deal with this particular data? You have to understand this is during COVID. Nobody comes in the office on most days. There are like 300 desks on my floor. On most days, I'm the only person that comes in on my floor or the floor above or the floor below. I like to go into the office to go and work. And so it's not like you could go and bang on somebody's door and get them to go and answer your questions. You send them emails, you send them voicemail, and they just won't respond after a while. So a fair amount of time goes by, and then 2 days after the election, the FBI people get back to us and they say, okay, you're going to have to fill out a FOIA request. This is one part of the Department of Justice telling another part of the Department of Justice that whose job it is to get the data from them, that they have to fill. I mean, you're a reporter, you've been a reporter, you know what a FOIA request is. It's something reporters do, okay? You're going to have to fill out a FOIA request. And then to make it even worse, they said, even if you can get the form into us today, we're sure we're not going to be able to process this until after January 20th. And we're sure that the Biden administration will not be interested in looking at this data. So there's no reason for you to even bother filling out the form to go and apply for the data. So we go and argue back and forth for a while. They disappear again, stop responding. And then the Thursday before Thanksgiving, I get a call from a guy that I know, and you probably heard of, Grover Norquist. Grover and I wrote a book together about a decade ago. And so I know Grover pretty well. And Grover was going to meet with Mark Meadows the next day, the chief of staff for the White House. And Mark who I know somewhat, and Mark had reached out to Grover and said, what things can we still do in the Department of Justice before the end of the Trump administration, and find out what those are. So Grover met with Mark and gave him two of my ideas. I gave Grover two ideas and he passed them on to Mark. And Mark said that he liked both of my ideas and that he was going to call up Bill on Monday morning and Bill Barr and say that the White House wanted Bill to do three things before the end of the administration. Two of them were mine. And so it's my understanding that Mark called up Bill on Monday, and at sometime around 11 o'clock that morning, Bill contacted the people in the FBI and told them to stop goofing around and to work with Lott on getting this work together. Later that day, Politico comes out with a story at the top of their website, very top of their big letters, saying controversial pro-gun researcher joins Department of Justice. So apparently what happened was as soon as Bill told the FBI people to work with me, their first response was to go and call up the news media people and to complain about having to work with me on the stuff. And so all heck kind of broke loose at that point. I don't know how many emails and phone calls the Department of Justice got, but I was told that they got more calls for me being fired than anybody else that they'd gotten during the Trump administration, which I guess is an accomplishment.
So that's just because of you trying to get people to complete their jobs.
Right, exactly. And so just show how far they were willing to go in order not to provide this data. I mean, I don't understand how people can be upset about looking at this data other than just trying to hide something. And I know what they're trying to hide, basically, on it, because it would show that the NICS background check system is incredibly racist, and which goes against kind of what, they don't want to go and show there. And so I had 15 FOIA requests. The PR people at the Department of Justice were completely freaked out. They said they'd never seen so many FOIA requests at one time for any person at the Department of Justice. And I said, they're all from the same group. They're from Moms Demand Actions, Students Demand Actions, Every Town for Gun Safety, the Trace. I said, they're all Bloomberg groups. And they probably just had a conference call that said, you asked for this, you asked for this. They wanted to give them emails going back to 2015, which basically they just wanted to bury me with paperwork that was there. So anyway, a couple weeks go by and things finally start to settle down. And the FBI people start to work with the Bureau of Justice Statistics people on the data. And they give the BJS people the data, and the BJS people are looking at it and say, something's really wrong here. These numbers just don't make any sense. And they called up the FBI people, and the FBI people said, "Oh, we were just going to call you. We apologize. We don't know what happened." I mean, this is simple data. You just kind of imagine an Excel spreadsheet where you're just summing up the columns. I don't even know how somebody could make mistakes. It takes like 10 minutes to go and do this at most. They apologized, said that they would get right onto it. And about a week later, they send the BJS people the data again. There's still problems with the data. The BJS people call up the FBI saying, there are real problems with this data. It's not fixing this. And the FBI apologizes, said they don't know what happened, that they're going to get back, to it. That happened 4 times. The last time that happened was on January 19th. And again, they apologized. Again, they said that they were going to go and fix the data and send it in. All I know is we're all out the door on January 20th.
Oh, of 2021?
Right.
When Biden took over.
Right, exactly. So we're all out the door. A report had been put together on the NICS background check system where one section was going to be on the errors in the NICS background check system report. The Biden administration put out the report, but it was missing that section. They had no discussion about the errors in the NICS background check system, which is pretty much what the FBI people had predicted to begin with.
They didn't want to reveal that the Democrat-controlled FBI was racist, that Democrats would be racist.
Well, that the data would show that the NICS background check system for important part of the gun control stuff was systematically, massively discriminating against Black and Hispanic males.
Wow.
You can imagine, you've worked in business. Can you imagine doing background checks on employees that looked at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays? If you go and talk to a business owner and say, I think you ought to look at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays for doing background checks, that business owner will look at you like you're from Mars. They will think you're nuts. And if the company were to do that under federal law, they would be sued out of existence. And so the question is, why can't the federal government meet the same standards for doing background checks that private companies have to meet? No company would look at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays.
This is just the latest in a list of examples that seems to show that the Department of Justice is just brazenly corrupt. And they don't do there. It seems there's no check and balance on this Department of Justice. How do we fix it?
I think you have to get rid of almost everybody that's there, to be honest. I'll give you another related example.
So the next president just needs to fire everybody?
I think he needs to fire as many as he can, get rid of. Because I think what they've done over time is that they've pushed out people that might have been critical of, or thinking differently on these different things. I'm asked sometimes, how could you have the FBI and the CIA and others spying on a presidential campaign for another party and not have leaks or whistleblowers occurring there? And basically the answer, at least from what everybody told me when I was in the Department of Justice, was that, well, if everybody agrees with everybody else politically, it's not too surprising that you would have something like that happen. You have to make sure that everybody that's involved agrees with everybody else politically. And I think, unfortunately, there's large sections of the Department of Justice and other agencies where you have that occurring. But just another example on these NICS background checks. Twice, Congressman Thomas Massey, when he's had Director Wray come and testify before his committee, has asked for getting this data on the errors in the NICS background check system. Twice, Wray has promised over the last few years to go and provide that data. He has never provided it. He promises it, and then it never comes through. I was just talking to Gail Harriet on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. I got the U.S. Civil Rights Commission about 8 months ago to go and request this data from the FBI. She made the request. My understanding that they followed up And the FBI just ignores the request. They won't even respond to either the promise that was made to Congressman Massey or to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission.
That's troubling. It just continues to be troubling how many examples we're getting of the corruption within the DOJ. We got to wrap it up, though. Thank you so much, John Lott, for coming on and giving your insider insight on what's happening with the Department of Justice. You are the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. So great talking to you.
Thanks very much for having me on. People can find more on all the things that we've been talking about, all the data and detail at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. Thank you very much for having me on, Ivory.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John Lott.